Mike Moore Media, the first place to hear Rockingham County news and information.
On the media line, the Chief of Police in Reidsville, Robert Hassell, our monthly podcast. Our program is sponsored by That Little Pork Chop on Monroe Street in Uptown Eden. Chief, welcome back. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Mr. Moore. Thank you for having me.
Always good to have some time to talk. Well, we hear so much about the opioid crisis. It's everywhere. How is it affecting Rockingham County, more specifically affecting Reidsville, Chief?
Oh, Mr. Moore, this is something that affects many of our citizens across our country, across our state, and even here in Reidsville. You know, going back to 2017, you know, when we started really looking at our numbers more closely, you know, in across Rockingham County, it was like 129 overdoses back in 17, and of that number, we had 16 overdoses here in Reidsville. And when you fast forward to 19, there was around 233 overdoses across our county, and of the 233, 35 were here in Reidsville. So from 17, there were 16 in Reidsville, up to 35 last year. And as of today, we're around 28 overdoses this year. So I'm hoping that we're going to have less overdoses in Reidsville this year, but we could see an equal number. And this, you know, crisis with opioids and addiction and overdoses, it affects many individuals, but it indirectly affects our community. Mm-hmm. It has an effect on our whole community. So we want to take a proactive approach to try to deal with the opioid crisis here in Reidsville, to try to combat that problem, because we know enforcement is a huge component, you know, but it's not the only reaction that we should have when dealing with this problem. So we want to be proactive, and we come up with a multifaceted, different ways of trying to do that. Okay.
Yeah, proactive is always best. And I've jotted down these numbers. That's interesting when you kind of see that in print there, comparing fast forward from 2017 to 2019. Wow. So what are you doing to deal with the opioid crisis in Reidsville, Chief?
Well, first, you know, back in 16, 17, the first thing we wanted to make sure we did is to make sure our officers have the necessary and needed medication to directly help these individuals going through an opioid or an overdose crisis, and that's Narcan. Our county and partners working with our agency and all the other agencies across our county make sure they provide that needed Narcan. So every police officer for the City of Reidsville Police Department has that needed medication. So if we respond to an individual who is going through that crisis and an overdose at that moment, we can deploy or give that Narcan to the individual to overturn that reaction to the overdose. Life-saving medicine is directly given to that individual while EMS and other medical responders are on the way to the scene. So that was number one. We wanted to also make sure we are better tracking our numbers. You know, many times, you know, when we see numbers, it's based off the zip code of Reidsville, the 27320. And our zip code is, I believe, is the largest zip code in Rockingham County. So when we were seeing numbers that were reflecting much higher overdoses attached to Reidsville. Mm-hmm. But once we start looking at our numbers, our crime analysts, and we were using geofencing and our GPS data and the overlays of our city limits, still numbers that we were concerned with, but we had to fine-tune to pull out of those numbers from the county what was actually what we seeing here in Reidsville. So we're using our GPS mapping to get those exact numbers, And in addition to that, our patrol commanders who are here 24 hours a day over a particular shift, they help us collect that information we need. So every overdose they respond to, or one of the men under their command goes to, we collect that data and forward it to our crime analysts. So that way we know we're getting accurate numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with that also, you know, we're fortunate we have a crime analyst within our agency. So we're able to look at where these overdoses are actually occurring in our city so we can direct efforts into those neighborhoods and communities appropriately as we move forward. So then we moved on to being more proactive. We wanted to make sure we put out as much information on resources as we possibly could. Mm-hmm. And we created 4 informational packets. And they were, one packet was on fraud and identity theft, the second one was on domestic violence, a third was on youth services, and then the fourth, which is what we're talking about, was a packet on drug abuse and addiction. So if we go to a call and an individual has just experienced an overdose, we would leave, an officer will leave that information packet on drug abuse and addiction with the individual or a family member or a loved one, or just leave it at their place of residence. So that way that individual or loved one will have the information inside that packet on resources available in Reidsville and Rockingham County, services that they can call on to help, to get them help to deal with their addiction.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a great idea.
Yes, sir, you know, because, you know, sometimes I've learned that we have the resources in our county, in our area, but many people may not be aware of those resources. So the packet was instrumental back in 17, 18, getting that out there into the public so that we could pass it on to those individuals. And when you fast forward to this year, in 2020, we were very fortunate to have some willing service providers and other stakeholders within our community who wanted to partner with us, and we created the post-overdose response team, which we call PORT. And that team has taken a very proactive step in making sure that when there is an overdose within our city, a service provider will respond within 48 to 72 hours to follow up with that individual to ensure they already have the packet, but to give them additional information about what services are out here for them.
Well, I've heard a little bit about PORT, P-O-R-T, Post-Overdose Response Team. You and I have talked about it just in general terms a couple of months back. This just really started in July, but it looks like this is a great resource and good partnership with a number of agencies, Chief.
Yes, sir, it is. You know, we have a lot of community stakeholders who meet with my staff and I on a monthly basis. Stakeholders from, you know, Annie Penn Hospital to our district attorney's office. We have members from the Department of Health and Human Resources. We have members from Daymart. We have members from Insight Human Services. We have a wealth of community individuals and organizations and agencies who are part of our PORT team that meet monthly to discuss the issues that we're seeing here in Reidsville and how we can appropriately address that. So, like I said, you know, when we have an overdose, our team of service providers will respond out to that individual's location of residence to ensure that they understand, they know what services are for them. Mm-hmm. And we hope that will be the first step in getting them help to counteract this dreadful addiction that they're going through.
Let's talk about the DARE program. At one time, we heard a lot more about DARE than we have in recent years, and some communities don't even have that program anymore, but you still have DARE there with the Reidsville Police Department and in that community.
Yes, sir. We are proud to say that we have been educating our students here in Reidsville for over 30 years. Many people may not know DARE it started off with many federal grants and funding from different federal and state agencies decades ago, but much of that grant funding dried up. But Reidsville care for our youth, and so we continue to fund our DARE program within our schools ever since it started. And so every year we have certified DARE instructors who educate our kids about the dangers of drugs. And just last year, we looked at revamping that program. DARE National come out with a new component to talk about opioids and how the dangers of opioids and how it relates to our youth. So we quickly, once that new curriculum came out, we revamped our curriculum locally to ensure that we're teaching our children about the dangers of opioids and drugs. And many times these drugs, they're found in our homes. So there is the first educational piece to make sure we educate our kids about the dangers of these medications that may be found in their own home in the medicine cabinet. But then the second education piece is to the public, that many times these drugs aren't coming from the streets. They're coming from our own medicine cabinet, which is why it's important that our parents, our loved ones, everyone, do their part. And any medications that you have in your home, they're kept in a safe place. Talk to your kids and those in the home about the dangers of these drugs. But then when you identify there's drugs in your home that are expired or drugs that are no longer needed, how to appropriately and properly discard those drugs. And we're so fortunate, we're, again, one of the first agencies in Rockingham County to have a drug disposal box in our front lobby. And it is used, I would say, almost daily. We have citizens who will come by and drop off old or expired medication or medication that's no longer needed into that drug box, and then our staff appropriately destroy those drugs at the appropriate time.
That's great to have that available there for sure. I want us to do a part two, maybe next time we talk, Chief, or maybe a part 3 or 4. You mentioned those 4 packets at the beginning of our program. I think we need to cover all of those perhaps, but certainly more about PORT, the post-overdose response team, starting there in Reidsville, and at some point in time that will be expanding countywide, perhaps you said.
Yes, sir. Many of our stakeholders that work with us are county agencies, and I do have law enforcement executives representing our other municipalities and the county sheriff's office that are part of our PORT team. So the plan is hopefully in 6 months to a year, the concept here and how we respond to overdoses and follow up with these individuals will hopefully be taken countywide. So the same response you're seeing in Reidsville and trying to help these individuals, we will see expanded to our whole county.
Well, it's exciting what you're doing. I commend you and your team. Again, Team Reidsville comes into play there at the police department as well. Can we talk again? This is something we need to address on a regular basis, I believe, Chief.
Most definitely. It's all about educating the public on the things that we are doing and how they can better protect themselves. So, yes, sir, I definitely look forward to a part 2.
Same here. Well, thank you, Chief. I appreciate you and your department, and we won't talk again before the holiday, so happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you so much, and happy Thanksgiving to you and all your listeners as well.
All right. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. Bye. That's the Chief of the Reidsville Police Department, Robert Hassell. Good to have him on the program, and good to have that little pork shop on Monroe Street in Uptown Eden sponsoring the Chief's program. It's a great little rock and roll barbecue joint. People love those hot wings there at that little pork shop. New menu just coming out with some new sauces and things like that. Donna's well known for her hot wings. And, of course, everything else on the menu, too. Always a great selection. Give Back Saturdays in November. Part of the sales goes to Drive for Shelter, Rockingham County Dog Rescue. Thanks to them for sponsoring this program. And thank you for listening. And remember, RiseUpReidsville.com.